Hello, and welcome back to the True Crime Lounge podcast here on Spotify and YouTube. I have a Patreon that you can join for early access to episodes that are scheduled to come out. Oh, I also have a merch shop for all your true crime gear. For any updates on my channel or podcast, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. With that being said, let's dive into today's episode. How many of you have ever seen Silence of the Lambs? Well, if you ever seen the movie, then you are going to get to know the inspiration behind that movie. And even though Gary Heidnik is one of the lesser known serial killers, he is still one of the most sadistic and brutal to walk this planet. And it is also believed that he inspired the character Buffalo Bill in the movie. Before I dive into today's episode, I just want to remember to go ahead and disclose there are some graphic details that um it's just a trigger warning. Just gonna go ahead and tell you that. So do what you will on that with that information. But with this guy worse than the character created for him? To better understand that, we have to go back to his childhood. Gary was born November 22nd, 1943 in East Lake, Ohio, to Michael and Ellen Heidnick. He had a younger brother whose name was Terry. His parents were divorced in 1946, and the children were raised by their mom for 4 years before being placed into the care of their dad and stepmom. Gary would later claim that he was emotionally abusive by his dad and he suffered a lifelong problem of wetting the bed, and that his dad would humiliate him by forcing him to hang a stained sheet from his bedroom window in full view for the neighbors to see. And after Gary was arrested, his dad would deny these abuse allegations. I hate when parents do that. Like, you think it's teaching them a lesson. In reality, you're embarrassing the kid. It's not fun at all. But yet, in your mind, you think it is. But, like, don't get me wrong, I'm all for, like, doing little things to, like, poke fun at your kids, but, like, a kid doesn't want that being shown to the world at all. Um, but at school, Gary did not interact with his fellow students, and he refused to make eye contact. One time, when a new female student asked, "Did you get your homework done?" he would yell at her and tell her she was not worthy enough to talk to him. Somebody had a appraisal problem for sure. He was also teased oddly about his oddly shaped head, and when he and Terry claimed that it was the result of a young Gary falling out of a tree, nonetheless Gary performed well academically and had an IQ of 148. And the encouragement of his father, a 14-year-old Hedrick enrolled at Staunton Military Academy in Staunton, Virginia, for 2 years before leaving before graduation. At another period, in a public high school, he dropped out and joined the U.S. Army at 17. He served in the U.S. Army for 13 months, and during his basic training, his drill sergeant graded him as excellent, and he applied for several specialist positions, including a military officer, but was rejected. He was sent to San Antonio to be trained as a medic, and did well through medical training. However, he did not stay in San Antonio very long and was transferred to the 46th Army Surgical Hospital in Landstuhl, West Germany, within weeks of his new posting after earning his GED. In August 1962, he began complaining about severe headaches, dizziness, blurred vision, and nausea. A neurologist would diagnose Gary with gastroenteritis and noted that he displayed symptoms of mental illness. But he went on to prescribe trifl- bleh, triflazine. Sorry, I'm not good with medical terms and how you pronounce names, so please bear with me on that. In October 1962, he was transferred to a military hospital in Philly, where he was diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder and consequently honorably discharged from the military service. Shortly after his discharge, he became a licensed practical nurse and he enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania, only to drop out after a single semester. He worked at the Veterans Administrative Hospital in Coatesville, but he was fired for poor attendance and rude behavior toward patients. From August 1962 until his arrest in March 1987, he spent his time in and out of psychiatric hospitals, attempted suicide at least 13 times, and in 1970, his mom, who had been diagnosed with bone cancer, was suffering the effects of alcoholism, committed suicide and by drinking mercury chloride, and his brother Terry also spent some time in mental institutions and attempted suicide multiple times. In October 1971, he incorporated a church called the United Church of the Ministers of God, initially with 5 followers. In 1975, he opened an account under the church's name with Merrill Lynch, and the initial deposit was $1,500, and eventually amassed over $500,000, and this would be approximately equivalent to 2.7 million today. By 1986, the United Church of Ministers of God was prosperous and opulent. He used matrimonial service to meet his wife, Betty Distro, to whom he corresponded with mail for 2 weeks before proposing to her. She arrived from the Philippines in September 1985 and married Gary in Maryland the following month on October 3rd. The marriage rapidly deteriorated after she caught him in bed with a trio of other women. Although the course of their brief marriage, he forced his wife to be on the onlooker and performed intercourse with other women, and she also accused him of repeatedly raping and assaulting her. With the help of a Filipino community in Philadelphia, she was able to leave him in January 1986, and unknown to Gary until his ex-wife requested child support in 1987. He had impregnated Betty during a short marriage, and on September 15, 1986, she gave birth to a son, whom she named Jesse John Disto. Gary was also had a child with Gail Linko, a son they named Gary Jr. And this child was placed into foster care soon after the birth. Gary had a third child with another woman, Anjanette Davison, who was illiterate and mentally disabled, and their daughter Maxine Davison was born on March 16, 1978. And she was also immediately placed into foster care. Shortly after Maxine's birth, Gary was arrested for kidnapping and the rape of Anjanette's sister, Alberta, who had been living in an institution for the disabled in Township. In October 1971, he had started to call the church the United Church of Ministers of God. He fathered a child. He had signed Alberta out of the day and placed her into a locked storage facility in the basement, keeping her captive for 10 days. Police located Alberta in the basement of a coal bin, blood and terrified. She was taken to the hospital where she was examined and revealed that she had been raped, sodomized, and contracted gonorrhea. He was also arrested and charged with kidnapping, rape, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, false imprisonment, and interfering with custody of a committed person. He also served 3 years in Estacadro, a prison for the most severely mentally ill convicts. His original sentence was overturned in 1983 and he was released under supervision, and I do put supervision in quotes, okay, of the state sanctioned mental health facility. Gary married Betty from the Philippines October 1985 after corresponding for 2 years, and he also used a matrimonial service to meet Betty and corresponded with her 2 years before proposing. They arrived October 3rd, and Heidnick was forced his wife he had sex with other women and accused him of it. Gary lived in Philadelphia. and moved about the city with the shrewdness and the evilest predator. He also was determined not to get caught this time, and he had a plan. According to John Douglas of the FBI, he had a scheme to create a master race and kidnap African Americans and reach his objective. Is he trying to be Hitler? Come on now. Gary dug a pit in his cell to punish women that he kidnapped. He also spent hours practicing and perfecting his crimes and digging a deep pit in his cellar that he would hold multiple people for punishment, complete with multiple clamps he planned the shackles. He also would place nuts in the clamps and superglue them to the women and to and could not get them off. He would also focus on the attention of African American women, a segment of population that came from the property, some down to luck and prostitutes for those who would not be noticed if they were missing. So his victims, the first victim would be Josephine Rivera, who was 25 and was abducted in November 1986, when she thought she was going to turn a trick. But Gary dragged her down to his dark and dingy basement and chained her up. He beat her with a stick until she stopped crying. He played the radio and television loud to smother the screams, both the basement and upstairs. His second victim would occur within 3 days. Sandra Lindsay, who abducted her, who who was 24 and had diminished mental capacity, and went missing while she was walking to the local store, and she chained her up near Josephina, and they were forced each other to watch the other one get raped. Sandra's family also knew Gary and began to look for her, and bringing the police to Gary's home with loud music. They knocked and no one answered. In the case of Sandra, to try to throw police off, he had Sandra write a letter that she was doing fine and she was not to worry, along with Christmas cards. He drove to New York and mailed them from there. Sandra's family gave the police information about Gary, and previous charges of the 1978 kidnappings. And police spelled Gary's last name wrong and was unable to pull anything up, permitting him to continue this. His third victim would happen on December 22nd, 1986, when he would abduct another woman by the name of Lisa Thomas, who was 19. She was a single mom who was walking in the cold. He lured her into his car, proceeded to buy her lunch, and invited her to his house for a glass of wine. She lost consciousness and she awoke, and she had been raped and chained to the basement. He introduced her to the other women, who made them sandwiches after raping Lisa again. His fourth victim would happen January 1st, 1987, with Deborah Dudley, who was brought to the basement. She was a gutsy and confrontational over time. He and convinced Gary to purchase a portable toilet, tampons, and allow the women to get a bath now and then. His fifth victim, Jacqueline Jackie Askins, and by January 18th, he had kidnapped more than one victim. Jackie was 18, and he seemed happy with that number. He planned to birth 10 babies between them, and his plans, however, didn't work. He punished the women for daring to behave badly. One day, Sandra crawled out of the pit, and for this infraction, he hung her up by her wrist and beams, and he barely touching the floor. 1 week later, she was dead, suffocated after the weight of the baby on her lungs. Now, not knowing what to do, he took Sandra's body upstairs, and there he used a power saw, dismembered a young woman, cried, hearing the noise of a babe. He proceeded to store Sandra's legs and arm in the freezer, but was not done, and in fact, it was beyond comprehensible. He boiled her head in a pot of water, cooked her ribs in the oven, and he boiled them with his teeth, and the smell was so putrid that even neighbors called the police. I'm trying so hard to keep this down right now. I really am. So the police showed up, knocked on his door, answered, and told the officers that he had dozed off and burnt the rose. And the police went on their way. Another run in with the law fell to curtail Gary's plans. He returned to the kitchen where he put Sandra's body through a meat grinder and mixed it up with dog food and gave it to the women to act as forced cannibalism. Mm. He took her upstairs and showed her the head of boiling water. Did not have the strongest stomach as I thought I did after reading this. Um, when he realized his captives could hear him coming and going, he began to shove screwdrivers in their ears and was beating them. According to the UK Daily Mail, he not only tortured his victims physically, he also manipulated them in the pit against each other. While with Josephine ingratiating herself as as his favorite, on her birthday, he surprised her with a birthday cake and a pair of slippers. They all had Chinese food and cake together. Josephine Rivera was clever and saved herself from the clutches of her captor. He also placed Deborah Deadly in the boiling water and electrical wire in front of Josephina, ordering her to touch battery cables to touch the chain that bound her in the hole. A sudden jolt of electricity went through her body, and she violently shook and screamed. It didn't take long for her to lie limp in the water, and she was dead. The same night, Gary loaded up Deborah's body in his Cadillac in Coupe de Ville and drove with Josephina into the woods to a remote area in the Jersey Barrens. Josephina would tell the Philadelphia Inquirer 25 years later, I could hear him walking with my body, the crunch, crunch, crunch of the leaves. Hedrick opened the door to Josephina, and it was uh, about how he chopped up and cooked Sarah Lindsay, and got the idea from a comedy film called Eating Raoul. Over the course of the film, he took Josephina to Denny's to eat and took her shopping for clothes, and he was permitted her to also sleep in his bed. He really thought she was on his side. He really thought she was on his side, and when she went to make sure that this was her way out. So while out with Hedrick, Josephine was had ample opportunities to run, but she knew he would kill the other girls and leave nothing behind. Josephine actually returned to Josephine actually helped with the abduction of Agnes. To reward Josephina, he told her that she could go see her family. He dropped her off at the 6th and Giller and promised to return in 25 minutes. Instead, she ran and called 911 from a payphone, and the police thought it was so far-fetched that they took that it could just be someone upset, but they showed up with the police cars, saw her legs scars. She told the police to enter the home and go straight to the basement where they found two women chained together, naked to their waist. The third one was in the pit under plywood. Gary was arrested April 1987 and attempted to hang himself in a jail cell. And during his trial, he made eye contact with no one. He looked at no one, and she was glad that he wasn't smarter than her. Once free, Josephina was ridiculed by her fellow captives for being Hedrick's partner, but the ADA defended her, arguing that she'd been commanded and encouraged and forced to help her abductor. Gary was convicted of kidnapping 6 women in Philadelphia. He was sentenced to death. Hedrick was also convicted on 2 counts and sentenced to death. He was executed by lethal injection on July 6, 1999, at the State Correctional Institution in Rockview in Belle Point, Pennsylvania. Now for the road to recovery. Josephina returned to the streets as a prostitute, where she worked away that life after a year. And she would go on to say that my judgment was not clear, and that the difference and she couldn't tell the difference between that and of a sane person. She worked at various jobs as a clerk, daycare worker, and a waitress, and a security guard. She reconciled with her three children and is now a grandmother living in Atlantic City. And as of 2012, she was in counseling and enjoys her church, babysitting her grandchildren, and her Marlboro Light cigarettes. Her fiance, Chris Lau, told the Philadelphia Inquirer that I like her attitude and her strength. She's a survivor. Josephina was startling easily and had panic attacks. Sometimes she has to turn off the television in order to remind her to be reminded not to be reminded of her own trauma. Also, she can't stand to hear the sounds of leaves crunching under someone's feet, reminding them her of Deborah's death. Josephina loves to walk on the beach and collect sea glass shards and bottles and jars. Like her, like her life, it has reminded her over time of even tormentorous and turning waves, even that could change an jagged edge on smooth gemstones. Alright, that is it for today's episode. I will see y'all next time, and y'all have a great day.